It is just a matter of time before someone asks or needs information about a vacuum leak. You'll commonly hear people on forums talk about vacuum leaks and air leaks. Vacuum leaks and air leaks are the same exact thing. Technically, they are a vacuum leak. Every time your piston goes down, it creates vacuum. It's suction, basically. Every time a piston goes down, it sucks in air from the intake manifold. The intake manifold, let's just say, is a cavern. It's an enclosed space. So every time a piston goes down, it sucks air from the intake manifold into the combustion chamber. A little valve opens up, and air can only be sucked in when that valve opens up. And when the piston goes down, a valve opens up, which allows air to go into the combustion chamber. And then as the piston comes up, it ignites, and another valve on this side opens up and allows air to go out of the exhaust manifold. Basically just getting into some theory so that you can understand why vacuum leaks are important. Vacuum leaks are unmetered air. This is called a MAF, or a mass airflow sensor. On the V6, there is a VAF, or a vane or volumetric airflow sensor. On the 4-cylinder, we have a mass airflow sensor. That is your air metering device. And everything from this point right here, actually it's right in the middle here, your hot wire is actually sitting right in the middle. So everything from the middle of this sensor back all the way to the intake manifold to the combustion chamber has to be airtight. And when I mean airtight, you should basically be able to fill the entire thing up with water and not have any water leaks. It has to be 100% airtight from here to your, let's say, your intake manifold, because that's the last place that you have a gasket. So we're going to talk about common locations for air leaks to occur. I'm not going to go over how to do an air leak test because that's been done many times over. And I'll refer you to Scotty Kilmer's video on doing an air leak test using a cigar. It's a very low cost method, and I think it's a very valid one for DIYers. You don't have to go out and rent like an automotive smoke machine or a DJ smoke machine or something to smoke out your intake to look for leaks. Basically take the filter box off right here. It has to be airtight from here back, so you can take this off and be just fine. And you blow the smoke through right at this point right here. And that's basically how the smoke test would be performed on a 4-cylinder. On the V6, it's a little bit different. You're going to have to look at the front bank and the rear bank because there's two intakes, because it's a V6. And since it's a V6, you have two heads. One head, two head. That's the rear head, that's the front head. But on the 4-cylinder, we just have the one head and the one intake. Anywhere there is a connection between hose to hose, component to component, there is the possibility for an air leak to occur. And that means checking your gaskets, checking your connections, checking your clamps. That clamp is going to be your first place to check, because that's where your intake elbow, otherwise known as a main intake boot, that is where that connects up to your mass airflow sensor. That has to be airtight. It's tightened with the clamp. That has to be airtight, and you should check your elbow for cracking or splits or tears where air might be coming in. That is a common issue on that component, on this intake elbow. It's a 90-degree elbow, and it's the same on the V6 and the i4. It's a little bit different design, but the concept is the same. It's a 90-degree elbow made out of rubber or plastic, and it cracks and tears. Make sure that there are no cracks and tears and that it's airtight. Second location is where it connects up to your throttle body. You want to make sure that clamp is secure and airtight. The third location is actually where the throttle body meets the intake manifold. There's a gasket between the intake manifold and the throttle body. Okay, now it's really hard to see here. Right where the throttle body meets the intake manifold, which would be right about in this area, the throttle body comes off. So the whole throttle body has 4 bolts on it, and you can take this whole entire component off of the intake manifold. That whole component comes off. And where those two meet is a gasket, and that is a common location for intake leaks to occur. Sometimes that gasket can blow out. You'll have to replace that gasket. Or if you've ever taken your throttle body off and forgot to replace the gasket, sometimes the gasket can rip off with the throttle body. So every time you take your throttle body off, make sure that your gasket is good. If it is, you can reuse it. If not, if it cracks at all, period, at all, replace it. And the same thing with your intake manifold gasket. If your intake manifold gasket cracks when you take off your intake manifold, you have to replace that one as well. Pretty much this whole video is geared towards finding locations of air leaks that you might necessarily not think about that are just as important. The Pcv valve happens to be one of those locations. If the grommet around your Pcv valve or the Pcv valve itself is loose and is not airtight, that will introduce a vacuum leak. Vacuum is being pulled from the Pcv valve into the intake manifold, so the direction is going down in here. So vacuum is actually being sucked in through the cylinders and into your intake. Now your intake gasket lays about right here between your intake manifold and your head. Lays right in between. That's a gasket in between. But things that you might not really consider as much are these Pcv hoses and where they connect up. Those have to be good airtight connections as well. The Pcv valve itself has to be airtight. That 90-degree elbow has to be airtight, as well as that connection to the head has to be airtight. And not only do all of those have to be airtight with your Pcv system, your injectors as well. There's 4 injectors for the i4, 6 injectors for the V6, and there's tiny little rubber grommets associated with every single injector. Those injectors get plugged into the head, and if those little seals, called O-rings, if those go bad, they will introduce a vacuum leak. So you have to keep an eye on those as well when you're searching for vacuum leaks. Not only that, you have to inspect your hoses periodically and your pipes and make sure that you can blow through your pipes freely and that there's no clogs or restrictions, and they can rust through, so make sure that there's no rust. As you can see, there's rust on mine, and I live in Florida where rust is not a problem. So if yours rust through and create a leak in those pipes, you have to have those pipes replaced. More than likely, most people are not going to have those pipes replaced. They're just going to ignore them and replace them with entire new rubber hoses. So they'll just bypass that line and run a rubber hose up from there to wherever the rubber hose connects on the other side and just completely ignore that rusted through pipe. So those are some of the most common locations for vacuum leaks on the i4. I will say that 2 of the most commonly known locations for vacuum leaks are right there at the throttle body gasket, and as well as down around in that area where the intake manifold gasket is. So you've got your throttle body gasket and your intake manifold gasket. Those are the 2 most common areas for leaks. And another common issue is broken intake elbows. That's actually the #1 cause. They get a split, they get a crack, a tear, they introduce a vacuum leak, and then all of a sudden your engine starts running like crap, and you're like, why is my engine running like crap all of a sudden? Pull your intake off, check your intake boot. So this was just a really quick video that I could make on the subject. It's really a no-brainer. Smoke test the intake, check for leaks. There are other methods. You can squirt water looking for leaks that cause bubbles. I'll link you to that method that Eric the car guy showed me. Another one is using carb cleaner. That one's slightly more dangerous than obviously water or cigar smoke, but that's some that mechanics use as a real quick way to check for intake leaks while the car is running. As a carb cleaner, I'm not even going to really get into that. Hope this video has been helpful to the beginners out there who might have a vacuum leak and they have no idea where to start. And this is just for Mazda 626 owners. If it can help you out with another vehicle, hey, that's great. That's awesome. But again, I only really know the Mazda 626, so please try not to ask me questions that are like, I have a Dodge Ram, 2500, and my engine's having this kind of, I don't know about Dodge, I don't know about GM, I don't know about Honda, I just know Mazda. And Mazda is very similar to Mitsubishi, so I do field some questions about Mitsubishis. As far as electronics in here are concerned, most of the electronics in here do say Ford on them. However, Ford outsourced them to Mitsubishi, so most of the stuff in here is actually Mitsubishi. So we have a lot in common with the DSM guys. We actually use a lot of the same solenoids and stuff that the DSM guys do too. But as far as the electronic ignition system, that's Ford. Fuel system is Ford. But a lot of the evap system is Mitsubishi. So we've got a Ford fuel system and a Mazda engine with a Mitsubishi evap system. It's this car is so awesome because it's just been thrown together by 5 different manufacturers came together to make this car. And yeah, you might think this is like a Frankenstein car, but it's a really neat one. And that's just one of the reasons why I love it. Anyway, hope it helped you a lot. I'm starting to ramble, so yeah, that's it. I'm out. Hope you liked the video. Cool.